In 1977, a 27-year-old Israeli government employee sits in a Vienna cafe, sliding microfilm across a table to a Soviet intelligence officer. He's been doing this for 6 years. His handler trusts him. His payments arrive on schedule. Everything about this relationship works, except the man feeding secrets to the KGB is also reporting to Mossad. Or is he reporting to Mossad while actually serving the KGB? By the time Shabtai Kalmanovich dies on a Moscow street in 2009, intelligence agencies on 3 continents still cannot answer that question. The microfilm he carried contained real Israeli secrets. The deception he maintained fooled professional interrogators, and the money he collected came from both sides. This is not a story about a double agent who successfully played 2 intelligence services against each other. This is about a man who became so many different people that even he may have lost track of which one was real. Kaunas, Soviet Lithuania, 1970. Shabtai Kalmanovich graduates with a degree in chemical engineering. He's 23. His mother survived the Holocaust by hiding with a Lithuanian family after escaping the Ninth Fort. Now, his family applies to emigrate to Israel. Soviet military command discovers the application. Kalmanovich receives a draft notice for the Red Army the same week. Then comes the summons. The KGB office in Vilnius occupies a gray building on Gediminas Avenue. Kalmanovich enters at 9 in the morning. He doesn't leave until after 1 p.m. No recording of that conversation exists. No transcript was ever filed, but the outcome is documented in both Soviet and Israeli intelligence archives. Kalmanovich agrees to spy for the Soviet Union in exchange for immediate exit permits for his entire family. The deal seems transactional. Provide information about Israel once you arrive, and we expedite your family's emigration. Refuse, and your mother, who survived Auschwitz, spends the rest of her life in Kaunas while you serve in a military unit stationed near the Chinese border. In 1971, the Kalmanovich family receives their permits. They board a flight to Tel Aviv. Shabtai Kalmanovich arrives in Israel as a KGB asset before ever seeing the country he's been recruited to betray. Tel Aviv, 1972. Most Soviet immigrants avoid government work. The scrutiny is intense. Background checks are thorough. Shin Bet monitors Soviet émigrés specifically because the KGB plants agents among legitimate refugees. Kalmanovich does the opposite. He joins the Israeli Labor Party. He pursues positions with security clearances. Within 2 years, he's employed by the government press office with access to classified communications. Then he becomes a parliamentary aide in the Knesset. His KGB case officer has given him a specific target: Infiltrate Nadav, the Israeli liaison organization maintaining contact with Jews still trapped in the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc. These contacts represent Israel's intelligence pipeline into closed Soviet societies. Names on native lists can mean the difference between emigration and internal exile for Soviet Jewish families. Kalmanovich gets access to those lists. He begins photographing documents in government offices after hours. He uses a miniature camera provided during a 1974 trip to Vienna. The microfilm goes into a hollowed-out book. Every few months, he travels to Austria for meetings with his handler. The relationship develops a routine. Exchange information, receive payment, schedule the next contact. Kalmanovich returns to Tel Aviv and continues climbing within Israeli government circles. But Israeli counterintelligence isn't blind. Shin Bet has been monitoring Soviet émigrés since mass immigration began in the 1960s. They know the KGB embeds operatives among refugees. They've developed profiles for likely recruits, young men with families still in the USSR, graduates, with technical skills, anyone showing unusual interest in government work shortly after arrival. Shabtai Kalmanovich fits every indicator. Surveillance begins in 1973. Shin Bet watches him photograph documents. They track his Vienna trips. They note the pattern of his travel schedule matching suspicious activity in government offices. Then, instead of arresting him, they do something unexpected. They wait. For 4 years, Israeli counterintelligence watches Kalmanovich feed information to the KGB while building detailed documentation of his activities. They photograph his Vienna meetings from a distance. They catalog which documents he accesses. They monitor his bank accounts for unexplained deposits. What they don't do is tell him they know. By 1977, Shin Bet has assembled a complete operational picture of Kalmanovich's espionage activities. They know his handler's codename. They know his payment structure. They know his dead drop protocols, and then Mossad makes a decision that will define the next 17 years of his life. They're going to turn him. Vienna, March 1977. Kalmanovich meets his KGB handler at a cafe near the Naschmarkt. They've done this 11 times over 6 years. The protocol never changes. Kalmanovich orders coffee, sits at a corner table, leaves a newspaper with microfilm hidden in the fold. The handler arrives 8 minutes later, takes the newspaper, leaves an envelope containing payment. Today, the envelope contains 8,000 Austrian shillings. Kalmanovich returns to his hotel on Mariahilfer Strasse. He unlocks his room at 4:15 p.m. 2 men are sitting on his bed. The taller one speaks first. He places 3 photographs on the nightstand. The first shows Kalmanovich entering the cafe. The second shows the newspaper exchange. The third shows his handler's face and profile. The man identifies himself as Mossad. He doesn't give a name. The conversation lasts 90 minutes. Kalmanovich later describes it as the most terrifying hour and a half of his life, but his account varies depending on who's asking. In one version, he immediately confesses everything, claims he was coerced by the KGB in Lithuania, begs for protection. In another version, he denies the photographs show anything illegal, demands to call the Israeli embassy, only admits his KGB work when shown additional surveillance evidence. What's consistent across all versions, by the end of the conversation, Kalmanovich agrees to become a double agent. But here's what breaks the assumption from Phase 1. Mossad didn't just discover Kalmanovich's espionage in 1977. They'd known since 1973, which means for 4 years, they watched him photograph classified documents and deliver them to Soviet intelligence without intervening. The question is why? The answer reveals itself in what Mossad offers Kalmanovich that night. They don't threaten immediate arrest, they don't mention prison. Instead, they present an alternative: continue meeting your KGB handler exactly as before, but now you'll report every interaction to us. We'll control what information you pass. You'll feed them intelligence we want them to have, mixed with enough genuine material to maintain your credibility. Kalmanovich asks what happens if he refuses. The Mossad officer doesn't answer directly. He simply mentions that Shin Bet has already prepared charges: espionage, contact with foreign agents, theft of classified information. Each count carries a minimum sentence. The trial would be closed session because of national security, which means no public defense, no media attention, no international pressure for leniency. Then he mentions Kalmanovich's mother still has cousins in Minsk. The threat isn't explicit, it doesn't need to be. Kalmanovich understands, refuse cooperation, and the people he originally betrayed Israel to protect become leverage again. He agrees to work for Mossad, but the fracture begins immediately. Tel Aviv, April 1977. Kalmanovich meets his new Mossad handler in a safe house in Ramat Gan. They spend 6 hours reviewing his entire KGB operational history. Every document he photographed, every meeting location, every payment amount. The handler takes notes in a leather folder that never leaves his possession. Then comes the instruction that changes everything. Mossad wants Kalmanovich to continue his work for the KGB exactly as before, but with one addition: he'll now have access to more sensitive material. His job with Native is being expanded. He'll receive information about Israeli intelligence operations in Eastern Europe, details about asset networks, communication protocols. Kalmanovich asks the obvious question: why would you give me access to more secrets after catching me stealing the ones I already had? The handler's response: because the KGB needs to believe you're advancing in Israeli intelligence circles. If your access suddenly decreases, they'll suspect you've been compromised. If your access increases, they'll think their investment is paying off. But here's the problem Kalmanovich recognizes immediately. Every real secret Mossad gives him to pass to the KGB is a secret that could get Israeli assets killed. Every piece of disinformation he delivers puts his own credibility at risk. If the KGB discovers even one deliberate lie, they'll assume everything else is contaminated. They'll recall him to Moscow for interrogation. And Soviet interrogations don't end with hotel conversations and alternative arrangements. Kalmanovich raises this concern. The handler acknowledges it. Then he explains that maintaining a productive double agent requires acceptable losses. Some of the intelligence Kalmanovich passes will be genuine. Some Israeli operations will be compromised as a result. The calculation is whether those losses are worth the strategic advantage of controlling what the KGB thinks they know. This is when Kalmanovich asks if he can abort. Not abort the Vienna meeting. Abort the entire arrangement. Confess to the KGB that he's been turned. Accept whatever prison sentence Israel wants to impose. End the deception before it requires him to cause damage he can't reverse. The handler considers this for 11 seconds. Then he says, no. The decision has already been made at levels above both of them. Kalmanovich will continue as a double agent, or he'll be prosecuted for the espionage he's already committed. Those are the only options. Vienna, May 1977. Kalmanovich meets his KGB handler for the first time since the hotel room confrontation. He carries microfilm containing information about native operations in Poland. 80% of it is accurate. 20% has been altered by Mossad in ways designed to protect specific assets while appearing authentic. The exchange follows the standard protocol: newspaper with microfilm, envelope with payment. But as Kalmanovich walks back to his hotel, he realizes something that will define every meeting for the next decade. He no longer knows which intelligence service he actually works for. The KGB recruited him through coercion and pays him for secrets. Mossad recruited him through coercion and now controls which secrets he delivers. Both services believe they own his loyalty. Both services have leverage over his family. Both services can destroy him if they discover betrayal. And starting today, every word he speaks to either side has to be a performance so convincing that professional intelligence officers trained to detect deception accept it as truth. The question he cannot answer: what happens when you lie so successfully for so long that you forget which version of yourself is real? Vienna, November 1979. Kalmanovich sits in his hotel room reviewing the microfilm Mossad prepared for tomorrow's KGB meeting. The material concerns an Israeli asset network in Czechoslovakia. 3 names are real, 2 are fabricated. The operational details are accurate enough to verify through independent KGB sources, but structured to protect the network's actual communication protocols. He's done this 47 times over 2.5 years. Tonight, for the first time, he considers not showing up. The thought arrives while he's examining a photograph on the microfilm showing a Prague apartment building where one of the assets allegedly lives. Kalmanovich recognizes the address. He photographed the original document himself 6 months ago in a native office. That version listed a different apartment number. Mossad changed it, which means either they're protecting the real asset by moving him on paper, or they're sacrificing him by giving the KGB enough information to locate and arrest him. Kalmanovich has no way to know which. His Mossad handler never explains the strategic purpose behind specific disinformation elements. The doctrine is simple: you deliver what we give you exactly as we give it to you. But if the apartment number is wrong in a way that gets someone arrested, the KGB will eventually discover the deception. They'll trace it back through Kalmanovich's previous reports, looking for other inconsistencies, and they'll find them because Mossad has been seeding controlled errors into his intelligence for 2 years. He picks up the hotel phone, dials the emergency contact number his Mossad handler provided. 3 rings. A voice answers in German. Kalmanovich starts to explain his concern about the Prague address, then stops. The emergency line protocol requires a verbal code phrase before discussing operational details. He's supposed to say the phrase first, wait for confirmation, then speak. He forgot the phrase. For 11 seconds, he sits there, receiver pressed to his ear, trying to remember words he's rehearsed hundreds of times. The person on the other end waits. Finally, Kalmanovich says something close to what he thinks the phrase should be, but he's not certain he got it right. The voice responds with what might be the correct counter-phrase, or might be a warning that he's compromised the line. He hangs up. The next morning, Kalmanovich arrives at the cafe 40 minutes early. He orders coffee and watches the entrance. His KGB handler is never early. The protocol is precise. Kalmanovich arrives first, sits at the designated table, waits exactly 12 minutes, then leaves the newspaper and departs. The handler arrives after Kalmanovich is gone. But today Kalmanovich wants to see his handler's face. He's not sure why. Maybe because after 2 years of feeding controlled intelligence, he needs to confirm that the KGB still trusts him. Maybe because the uncertainty about the Prague apartment has created a need to verify that this entire arrangement hasn't already collapsed without anyone telling him. His handler arrives at 10:03 a.m., 9 minutes before the scheduled meeting time. This has never happened before. Kalmanovich watches him enter. The man scans the room, sees Kalmanovich sitting at the designated table, and for a fraction of a second his expression changes. Not alarm, not anger, something closer to confusion. Then he turns and leaves the cafe. Kalmanovich sits frozen. The microfilm is in the newspaper on the table in front of him. The handler just walked out. The protocol has collapsed. Two possibilities present themselves. Either the KGB has discovered he's been turned, and this is the preliminary to an arrest operation, or his handler spotted surveillance and aborted to protect them both. Kalmanovich has 60 seconds to decide whether to run. He stands, leaves the newspaper on the table, walks toward the exit. Every person in the cafe becomes a potential threat. The man reading a magazine near the window could be Soviet security. The woman paying her bill could be Mossad surveillance making sure he executes the meeting as planned. He reaches the street, turns left, walks 2 blocks before he realizes he's heading toward the Soviet embassy, which is exactly where someone panicking about KGB suspicion would go. He stops, crosses the street, doubles back toward his hotel. 3 blocks away, he sees his KGB handler standing at a tram stop. The man is smoking, checking his watch, waiting for public transportation like an ordinary person with an ordinary appointment to keep. Kalmanovich understands then what happened. His handler arrived early by accident, saw Kalmanovich already sitting at the table instead of having left the newspaper and departed, and aborted because the protocol violation suggested possible surveillance or compromise. The meeting collapsed because Kalmanovich broke procedure by arriving too early. Vienna, November 1979. Second attempt. That afternoon, Kalmanovich calls the contact number his KGB handler provided for emergency rescheduling. He uses a payphone near the Westbahnhof. The conversation lasts 40 seconds. New meeting scheduled for tomorrow, same location, same time. He spends the evening in his hotel room trying to decide if he should tell Mossad about the aborted meeting. The emergency line incident from last night means his handler might already know something went wrong. If he reports it, he has to explain why he broke protocol by arriving early. If he doesn't report it, and Mossad had surveillance in place, they'll know he concealed an operational failure. He decides not to report it. The next morning, he executes the meeting exactly as trained, arrives 12 minutes early, sits at the designated table, leaves the newspaper containing microfilm about the Prague network, departs before his handler arrives. Walking back to his hotel, Kalmanovich experiences something close to relief. The operation worked. The intelligence has been delivered. Whatever happens to the Prague assets is no longer his responsibility. This is the false release moment. Because 3 weeks later, his Mossad handler asks about the aborted Vienna meeting and why Kalmanovich didn't report it. They had surveillance on the cafe. They watched him arrive early, watched the KGB handler abort, watched Kalmanovich leave without executing the exchange. They saw everything. The handler asks one question: "Were you trying to make contact with your KGB officer outside the approved protocol?" Kalmanovich explains it was an accident. He arrived early because he was nervous about the Prague intelligence. He didn't think the timing would matter. The handler makes a note in his leather folder. Then he explains that from now on, every Vienna meeting will have doubled surveillance. Not to protect Kalmanovich, to verify he's not attempting unauthorized contact with Soviet intelligence. What Kalmanovich thought was a simple execution error has become evidence of potential triple agent activity. Mossad now suspects he might be working with the KGB to deceive them, rather than working with them to deceive the KGB. And because he didn't report the aborted meeting immediately, he has no way to prove otherwise. The lie he didn't tell has become more damaging than any lie he did. Tel Aviv, December 1979. Kalmanovich's Mossad handler moves their meetings from the Ramat Gan safe house to a Shin Bet interrogation facility in Tel Aviv. The change is presented as a security upgrade. The room has no windows. A tape recorder sits on the table between them. Every debrief now begins the same way. The handler asks Kalmanovich to recount his most recent KGB meeting in complete detail, then asks him to recount it again, checking for inconsistencies between the two versions. This is not how you treat an asset you trust. The surveillance reports from Vienna have created institutional doubt. Someone in Mossad's Soviet desk has raised the possibility that Kalmanovich staged the aborted meeting deliberately to signal his KGB handler that he's under Israeli control. The early arrival could have been a warning. The protocol violation could have been intentional. Kalmanovich tries to explain it was a mistake born from nervousness about the Prague intelligence. But the explanation creates a new problem. If he was nervous enough to break protocol, what else might he do during a moment of stress? Double agents who become unreliable become liabilities. His handler asks if he wants to terminate the arrangement. Not as an option, as a test, because someone genuinely working for Mossad would want to continue. Someone working for the KGB who suspects Israeli intelligence has lost confidence would want to quit before being arrested. Kalmanovich says he wants to continue. The handler makes another note in his folder. 3 months later, Kalmanovich's access to Nod of documents is quietly reduced. He's told it's a routine security rotation, but he recognizes what's actually happening. Mossad is limiting his exposure to genuine intelligence because they're no longer certain he won't pass it to the KGB outside approved channels. The reduction in access creates a cascading problem. His KGB handler notices the quality of intelligence declining. During their May 1980 Vienna meeting, the handler asks if something has changed in Kalmanovich's government position. The question is casual, but the implication is clear. The KGB has begun to doubt his value. Kalmanovich reports this conversation to Mossad. His handler interprets it as possible evidence that the KGB suspects he's been turned, which means they might be testing him, which means everything Kalmanovich reports about KGB suspicions could itself be a deception. By August 1980, Kalmanovich is trapped between two intelligence services that both doubt his loyalty while simultaneously requiring him to maintain convincing deception. Mossad reduces his intelligence access because they suspect KGB influence. The KGB notices the reduced intelligence quality and suspects Israeli control. Each service's suspicion reinforces the others, and Kalmanovich cannot tell the truth to either side, because the truth is that he no longer knows which service he's actually serving. The damage extends beyond Kalmanovich's personal operation. Between 1977 and 1980, Mossad fed the KGB approximately 200 pieces of intelligence through Kalmanovich, 80% of which contained accurate information mixed with strategic disinformation. The KGB built analytical assessments based on that intelligence. They made operational decisions. They allocated resources. But after the November 1979 aborted meeting raises questions about Kalmanovich's reliability, Mossad has to consider the possibility that he'd been signaling the KGB all along, which means every piece of intelligence he delivered might have been compromised, which means the KGB might have known which elements were disinformation and adjusted their analysis accordingly. Soviet archives reviewed after the Cold War revealed the truth. The KGB suspected Kalmanovich had been turned as early as 1978, but continued the relationship to study Mossad's deception methodology. They were running their own counter-deception operation through him. Neither Kalmanovich nor his Mossad handlers knew. The strategic consequence is that for at least 2 years, possibly longer, Mossad believed they were controlling Soviet intelligence assessments through carefully crafted disinformation, when in fact the KGB was filtering that disinformation to understand Israeli intelligence priorities and capabilities. The operation designed to deceive the Soviets became the mechanism through which the Soviets deceived Israel. And it continued for 7 more years after the November 1979 incident because neither side could afford to acknowledge the deception had failed. Kalmanovich begins having panic attacks in 1982. They occur during routine moments, sitting in his Tel Aviv apartment, walking through a government building, once while meeting his Mossad handler. His hands shake. His breathing becomes irregular. The attacks last between 4 and 11 minutes. A doctor prescribes medication. The prescription goes into his medical file. The medical file is accessible to security clearance reviews. In 1984, Kalmanovich's government security clearance is suspended pending psychiatric evaluation. The evaluation concludes he's experiencing anxiety consistent with prolonged operational stress. The recommendation is temporary leave from sensitive positions. But temporary leave means loss of access to classified material, which means he has nothing of value to pass to the KGB, which means the entire double agent operation loses its strategic purpose. Mossad makes a decision. Instead of ending the operation, they expand Kalmanovich's business activities in Africa. He becomes a diamond trader in Sierra Leone, operating in regions where Israeli intelligence wants to monitor Soviet influence. His business cover becomes his primary intelligence function. The deception shifts. He's no longer a government employee passing secrets. He's a businessman whose African operations give him access to information about Soviet activities in West Africa. But the fundamental problem remains. Shabtai Kalmanovich has spent 13 years being interrogated by two intelligence services, maintaining parallel lies and remembering which version of himself to present in which conversation. The cost is not imprisonment or exposure. The cost is that he can no longer distinguish his own thoughts from his operational cover. When he tells his Mossad handler about KGB meetings, he's not certain if he's reporting accurately or unconsciously editing details to make himself seem more valuable. When he meets his KGB handler, he's not certain if his nervousness is operational stress or genuine fear of Israeli surveillance. By 1985, the question is not whether Kalmanovich is loyal to Israel or the Soviet Union. The question is whether Shabtai Kalmanovich, as a coherent person with genuine allegiances, still exists at all. The full operation continues for 2 more years before its final collapse. But the damage to intelligence operations, to strategic assessments, and to one man's identity has already been done.